Hello, everybody. Nick and Jason here. How are you?
Hello, how you doing?
Good. Weather's pretty good. I am excited to be here and enjoying joining all of you guys on a holiday here in Canada. Hi, Julian. How's it going, Jay? How's it going, Simon? Nice to see you guys all. Everyone can see us okay and hear us okay? And then just as another test, I'm just going to actually share my screen here to double check that everyone can see my Premiere Pro interface on their end. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, it looks good.
Awesome. Where's everyone from? Feel free to enter that in the chat as we just wait a few minutes to start at the top of the hour, which it is. It's amazing. It's 12 o'clock and we're good to go. Weather bad in Newcastle,
It's
Shetland
bad in
Islands.
London too, Jay.
Yeah, it's kind of overcast here in just outside of Toronto as well. Not the greatest. Raining in Shetland. Got it. Not the kind of a gloomy Monday it seems across the board. Well, we hope to entertain you with looking at stylistic effects for video editors. And thank you all for joining. Just wanted to give a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. First of all, this is continuing every Monday this month, and I believe into the months of November and December as well, but just with different topics. And on October 12th, we're here talking about stylistic effects and treatments for editors. You guys should all note that we are recording this session, and after the fact, if you'd like to check it out, there's a YouTube page, the Maxon Volume Training YouTube page. You can subscribe here, and I think within a few hours, this session will be available to you. And the topic is me and Jason are going to go through today is all about demystifying stylistic effects for video editors. And I know, Jason, on your end, you have a few examples to show,
Yep.
primarily inside of Premiere Pro, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
So
I'm
I'm
doing
going to,
everything in Premiere Pro.
awesome. And I'm going to hand over the floor to you here. There we go. Maxon Red Giant Organizer. And in a second, you should see an invite to share your screen.
There we go.
Awesome. And can everyone see Jason's screen okay? Just feel free to type that in the question and then we'll start going. Awesome. Thanks, Andreas. Thanks, Lucas. That's awesome. Great. So
Cool.
Jason, what are we looking at here?
Well, I might turn my camera off to
Me
save some real
too.
estate on the screen. So I've got a few ideas of just different ways of stylizing pictures. Obviously, there's thousands of techniques, and I've just picked a few using some different tools. The first tool I'm looking at is Lustre, and it's just, for those who aren't familiar with the Red Giant Universe tools, there's a tab in here. You can go to Windows, Extensions, and you have Red Giant Universe Dashboard. And this opens as a separate panel, which you can dock like any other panel in Premiere. I've made the screen big, so it's easier for you to see the controls. So if you're wondering why everything's quite large and lumpy, it makes it easier for you to see the text if you're on a smaller screen. But within this, if I maximize that to full screen, you see you get all the different tools and you can look at them. You can go into one and see all the different presets within a tool. So this is a great way to access the tools. They're also in categories that sort of make sense. So the first one I'm going to look at today is Lustre, which you can see here is like a 3D looking sort of 80s style text tool. It comes with quite a large number of presets built in, but once you apply it, I'll just get back out to, well, my tilde key's not working. That's not so good. There, that's about it. So obviously when you've chosen a preset, as I've already started with, this is just the default one from the library. You can see you get a whole range of different options that you can customize and stylize colors and the amount of the bevel and softness, drop shadows, all kinds of things. But a couple of the more interesting techniques is, I've got this next example where instead of filling it with a gradient, I'm actually using the reflection map. I'm using the image itself, or no reflection map. So it gives you quite a nice glass look, which if I make that a bit bigger, So you can see it's quite a nice glassy look. And then you can see, you can animate things like I've got the little light reflection track down through it, which is just quite a nice glassy look. So I guess my thought is sort of, I always try and get these tools and do a little bit more with them. Don't sort of use them the obvious way, sort of try and find ways to make it a bit different. So like another example is here's the same thing, and I've just sort of animated the text flying through the scene. Still got, you can see the reflection sort of tracks down through the letter. And it's just sort of quite a nice glassy looking text. Quite a quick way to make something very simple that looks really stylish and good. It takes only a matter of minutes. And all that is playing with the size of the text. Excuse me. Likewise, you can also use a logo. So here I've used CSKA Moscow's basketball team or football team's logo. And you can see there's the little reflection moving down it. And it just gives it that sort of glassy look. It just sort of brings the logo to life, if you like. If I match frame that, you can see there's the original logo. So it's just quite flat and cartoon looking, whereas this side here, it now looks sort of glassy and a lot more definition. But then similar to what I've done with the text here, another technique, just go back to this glass look, is I've done the glass look with the logo and then sort of put another layer of the logo on top and made it see-through, so it looks sort of glassy and a bit moody, but you can see the texture through it. So I guess the key here is like this Lustre tool, while the examples all show you the simple text, and in fact more like the straight text, there's lots of things you can do. Like for example, here is using a circle, and by moving it, it gives you that sort of nice magnifying glass look, but all with one tool, it gives you a nice edge. So I guess the key to these sort of techniques are just using a tool, and this is where the dashboard comes in handy. You can find a tool and think, well, how can I use that a bit differently? Especially because obviously if a lot of people have these tools, you start to see the same effects. So by tweaking some of the controls, you can get some quite different things. So similarly, that was using Lustre in the Universe toolkit. The VFX suite has a similar tool called Chromatic Displacement. This is quite good where it just uses another layer. So for example, like you can see I've got two layers under here, and on the picture layer, I've just got the chromatic displacement, and I'm telling it to displace the layer which is on video 1, which you can see is underneath. So if we go through the first one, you can see it's quite glassy looking. And you could do things like soften it off, which will make it look a bit sort of softer and smoother. But even like that's quite nice. You could almost have, you could use that as a transition way to bring in the text. Is quite cool, almost like it sort of melts into the image. So again, it's sort of, the obvious thing is adding sort of a little bit of bevel and making it look like someone stamped text in, but keyframing that as a transition is a really cool way to bring in things.
Cool.
It's almost like it's a rippling, you're almost looking at a reflection in the water and some sort of text is pulling out of it. But likewise, this is using a text layer. So if we look at that, it's just an image I made up in Photoshop. And likewise, you can use a circle, and you can see it's just quite a nice, the VFX tool is probably a little more advanced than the Universe tool, but it's just another option for a similar effect, and you can control the amount of displacement, and so you get some nice colors into it and different amount of chroma spread.
So Jason, I just had something to add,
Yep.
both with the Universe and what you're talking about with chromatic displacement. With Universe and chromatic displacement, because they're shared, the same effects are installed in After Effects on your system, you could send this over to After Effects and then continue to tweak those effects inside of there. And then with Universe, which we'll get into in a bit, Jason can actually save a preset, and that's cross-platform through a multiple of applications. So we're talking DaVinci Resolve, we're talking Final Cut Pro 10, we're talking Avid Media Composer, and in the same way that we showed a looks workflow that we'll demonstrate again, we can have a preset shared back and forth between us, multiple application, which is incredible. So it goes beyond the Adobe ecosystem when we talk about Universe.
Well, and also it's cross-platform as in PC and Mac. So if I make something on a Mac, I can share it with someone on a PC, and it'll work perfectly for them as well. In fact, we'll demonstrate that. I've got a little demo I put together a bit later in the session that I actually sent Nick over the weekend, so he can actually use the effects that I've created here, which are very quick and easy to share. So that's sort of a quick look at using Lustre and chromatic displacement. The next thing we'll look at is hologram. Now, for those who have seen it, the hologram effect, if we come down here, you'll see it's sort of a classic Star Wars-esque type hologram effect here. In fact, it even looks like Obi-Wan Kenobi or someone in the example. And this is using, I've applied it to a chroma key, so you can see it has all different artifacts. But one of the cool things with hologram is this is quite a powerful tool in the sense that it has loads of different elements to it to create that hologram effect. The simple controls, you've got more damage and more often, which is obviously how much damage and how frequently. But then when you come down to effects, you start to get all different elements that you can play with. In fact, where are they all gone? Oh, effects down the bottom. I can't even see it. It's right in front of me. So when we go to effects down the bottom, you've got all the separate attributes, and you can see here, so colorization turned on. I can turn that off, and now we get the original color. So one of the cool things here is you can use just a part of these settings. So for example, this green screen here, the old-fashioned scan line technique, if I select that and scroll down to the effects again, you can see all I've got on is the scan lines. So I haven't turned on anything else. So the thing to remember with the hologram effect is while you can start with one of the presets, you can turn on and off various things. So we could just add some colorization to that and play with the color settings, or sort of half colorize it. So you can almost use it as a grading tool. So there you go, it's desaturated a bit and based on these colors, which you can obviously dial in whichever colors you want. So the key here is if you're trying to create a look, don't forget that there's a lot of the effects have various steps to them. So you can see within here, you've got random frame rate, which can do some interesting things because the hologram effect used in Star Wars sort of had a jittery frame rate to make it look like a sort of a low quality signal, I guess. You have glows, scan lines, different lines, scrolling lines, which look like tape damage, static, ghosting, distortions. So it goes on and on. So you could just use ghosting, which you've got to turn on the upper layers, but you could see, without going too far, there's loads of different things you can do. There you go, if we turn that up a bit, you can see you can control separate elements. So I actually use Holomatrix, strangely, as a grading tool, probably not with the scan lines, but you can get some cool looks just by playing with something quick. If I turn that off.
Jason?
Yes.
Amy had a question here in the chat, which was just that, did you guys do the commercial for the Premier League? So this would be a question for Jason.
I don't do too much Premier League anymore. I worked on the Premier League quite heavily for about 12 years. I mostly work on the Champions League and UEFA content now, but I work with a lot of the guys who do. It depends where you're watching it. If you're watching it in the UK, that would have been most likely done by Sky or whoever the rights holder is here. Premier League Productions, which is based in the UK, make promos and distribute them to the worldwide rights holders. But it's always hard to tell. A Premier League promo could be made by an individual broadcaster, could do their own. One of the companies I work for, which is Premier League Productions, they actually do make stuff distributed all over. So it's kind of a range. It's quite hard to tell where a specific thing was made. And especially certain broadcasters, I know UK broadcasters like to make their own stuff rather than use the stuff provided by the Premier League just to make sure it's all fresh. So it's hard to answer specifically, but you can be sure a lot of these, anything I do work on ends up with scan lines and things like this. So just sort of go back over this. So the key here is just thinking about using elements of the tools. You can see that it's not brilliant, but with some more tweaking, it's an interesting look for a grade. Using a tool, Holomatrix, and you can see it's got flashing in it, and by turning on and off all the different attributes. I think like there's an extreme version where you can make it look like a bad TV. So it can be used to replicate a whole range of different things. The next thing I'll look at is a tool that I suppose it adds style to what you're doing. It's called Progreso. It's part of the Universe Toolkit, and it's basically a graph type tool. So you can see here, I've just got a simple circular graph. If we go into here, you can see Progreso. It comes with a range of different sort of preset graph tools, and then of course you can stylize them and do what you want. You can see we have a range of different arcs. We have linear bars, we have pie charts, we have linear sequences, goes on. And then with each one, like anything in the Universe toolset, when you come down here, there's a load of variables. There's all kinds of things you can control: the font, the size, where it sits in relation to the graph, all the colors, how big every element is. So it's infinitely controllable and incredibly powerful. The sort of thing you can get lost playing with for a long time. I've been using it quite a lot for statistics-based work in sport because it can be quite useful for that sort of thing. And for example, like here's a little thing I've just sort of slapped together where you could have 5 different statistics, and you can see they animate out automatically just simply using a progress bar on each one. And in this case, in here rather, you can just see I've got 5 Progreso, so I'm using one instance of the tool for each bar. So then each one is keyframeable. You can see when they're animating is all controlled. And every attribute within it, the color and everything. So this is sort of designed in Liverpool colors. And you see every attribute is keyframeable, and you can control it, add more text to it, use different text on either sides. Another little example, so that's using a linear sequence. Another example I put together is using a chroma key shot and using this is also using array gun, which is another universe tool. Which if we just go back here, it was in motion graphics. Array gun is a really cool tool to make quick backgrounds. So this is basically one of the standard ones. I've just tweaked the shape and changed the colors, and it helps you make a graphic quite quickly. So you can see here, like for example, we could have a little bar animate and say how many shots on target. I'm not saying he got 85%, it was more just to show you how the graphic works. So that's kind of the use of Progreso, but obviously the applications with graphs, it can go on and on what you can do with that. And especially the fact that it's all done within the edit, it's incredibly powerful.
I had something just briefly to add about Progreso, which I think is super cool, Jason. And that is that once you keyframe the one element, which is the Progreso bar, you can actually then still go ahead and choose another preset.
Yes.
And it will keep those keyframes. So literally in several instances, you only have to keyframe once. So Jason had 2 sets of keyframes there on one version of Progreso. He could then apply an instance of Progreso or a new one, and those keyframes would carry on over to the new effect, which I think is kind of awesome. And there were 2, oh, sorry.
No,
go ahead. There were 2 questions that came out, and one, Jason, was, can I use these presets without a GPU?
I would imagine you can with, well, obviously all computers have some form of GPU. Just however, the faster your GPU is, the better it will work, obviously.
And there was another question, I'll shed some light on this first, which is how can I edit with music for a beginner? I think in terms of effects, one thing is that you could essentially create a range of markers over your music in the timeline to time out certain stylistic effects or transitions if you were doing that inside of Premiere Pro. And then I think that there's another, if hopefully I'm answering your question correctly, another level to that with stylistic effects if you're working inside of After Effects. One is After Effects has the ability to allow you to take music and convert that to a series of keyframes. And you can take that levels data and then feed it to a specific property of one of these stylistic effects in Universe or VFX Suite. But if you're looking for control of that or linking parameters to a specific musical track, you probably have a little bit more control inside of After Effects. And then there's one tool in Trapcode Suite that we should mention as well that does another a job where it will take all of your music and convert that to keyframes, which is, I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on this. Jason, Trapcode. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I
sound
can't think
keys.
of it.
Trapcode sound. Yeah. So Trapcode sound keys will allow you to see a visual of your music track. It will then convert it to keyframes based on a range that you identify, so you have more control over a specific frequency. Then you can take that information or that data and then feed it to a specific parameter of one of these universe effects.
Yeah, I would, like you, I would do, if I were doing that kind of work, I'd probably be working more in After Effects. You can obviously cut to the music, but like even that graph, if you wanted that sort of graph opening and closing to the beat of the music, I would be doing that in After Effects because you could extract the keyframe data, as you said, and then apply it to that function. But
Yeah.
obviously in Premiere, you can't really link functions to each other. You can copy keyframes and keyframe things, but it's not the same as After Effects where one function can be driven by a result of another.
Yeah, and like a specific part of the music for an effects-driven workflow, you'd probably be better off in After Effects in some ways, or trying it out there.
Yeah. So the next little effect I'm looking at is line, which is another universe tool, and it sort of does what it says on the tin. It creates a line. Again, this can be used for multiple ideas. Like in here, you can see there's lots of standard lines, different colors, different shapes. Like one example that I've done is for a promo sort of idea, is sort of tracking the ball for a goal. And you can see that the actual line itself takes the colors of Man City. So you can do things like that. And this is where it's really powerful, that if I were to take that effect, and if I really like that line and we like the color of it, I can save that as a preset. If I call that Man City goal line, you'll see then when I go to presets, so this is what Nick was talking about before, which I'll take you. So you now see I've got Man City goal line as a preset. So I could apply that. So that will now appear inside After Effects or in Avid, or I could email that to someone and share it with other people. So it's quite a powerful thing. But the point here is that I've made a dotted line and sort of drawn an arrow. Obviously, I've keyframed it by hand because it's just as quick to do it that way. A similar example, a little basketball shot, but this time I've actually made a circle that sort of follows the ball and a line that sort of tracks the path. And that was literally, it's a couple of keyframes. You can see I've just sort of tracked along. It took 2 minutes to do. But again, it's a really cool effect and can be used to sort of highlight things in a promo or an opener, and just sort of adds a graphic element to things and takes no time to do. Another little trick is for maps, and this is quite cool, and this will show the power of the line. So this image here, I'll just go back a step and turn everything off. Basically, this is a standard map that looks like that, which just comes from a mapping set that I have, but I wanted it to look a bit more grungy. So I've used Magic Bullet looks, which we covered last week. And a couple of things I've done partly here is I want to draw a map to connect where I am to where Nick is. So I've used a blurry edge. So I've used a few different tools within Magic Looks to sort of focus the attention in the center of the image. And this is sort of a good way of stylizing image. And it's using looks not only for a grade, but also to attract attention. I've then applied a transform on top, which actually does a push as I add the line. And then the line tool itself is quite powerful. So not only is it the line that you saw in these previous examples, but you saw on this one, wherever it's gone, back a bit, you've also got the circle. You've got different elements. So when we look through this one, you can see it starts off, I've built a little thing that identifies London. So we've got a little twirly icon and the text. All of that's generated within the line tool. Then I have an arrow, but I've gone with a 4-point Bezier. So it's got a start, an end, a control point for this hump and a control point for that hump. I've also keyframed things like the arrow. So the arrow disappears as soon as it lands. And when it does, Nick's location pops up with a nice little animation. So you can see all of that. And then you can see subtly, there's a secondary line draws out, which you can have follow the same path or move away. It could be a different color. And within the tools, you've got control over all of these different attributes. And you'll see here when I expand this out, all the little keyframes I've got doing different bits and pieces. And you can see color choices. You can choose the text justification, text font, text size, icon size, types of whether it's a dotted or straight line. And so you can see that's quite a cool little map to sort of take us from me to Nick, which at this point I'll hand over to Nick. And before I do, one point is this Magic Bullet grade and this line preset. If we just quickly go back here, you'll see in my presets, choose a preset at the bottom. I've got Jason's map animation. I've just sent that to Nick, so he's got exactly the same icon. So at this point, I'll hand the screen over to Nick, who can show you that he has the same thing.
I do. And Jason, just a quick question. Andreas had a question about talking about maps. Do you know any good places to get or buy map data that can be used without watermarks, or that you currently use in your projects?
Yes, I bought a set some years ago called Mountain High Maps. I think it was a couple of $100s, but at the time it used to come on DVD, and you buy it and it's perpetual. So once you bought it, you own the rights to it, and it came with a load of things. Before I switch that over, so this map here, for example, if I match frame to it, it zoomed in. That's actually a map of the whole world. But there's also sections. You can get America, there's Europe, there's all different elements, and there's all different parts. There's displacement maps, so it can give it proper bump maps and things like that. So it's quite a useful tool set, and I use it all the time. And you can see here that from the original map, which looks a bit boring, with some simple coloring, it can look pretty cool. And plus you've got elements. It also gives you border lines. You can highlight the countries. It gives you city dots and cities. And I believe they're still selling the same thing. So that Mountain High Maps, it's called. While Nick's presenting, I'll see if I can find a link and share it in the questions for you. I'll hand this over to Nick.
Thanks, Jason. And I had one thing to add, but I'm not sure if it's completely all of the resources that it gives, if it's all, I think most of it's watermarked, but it's still cool for producing map data. But this is inside of After Effects. It's a AE script called GeoLayers 3, and it does reference 3 or 4 different map engines. Some of them you do have to place the logo on. I think others you don't, but don't quote me on that. And I think one of the cool things about this is it does link to Trapcode Mirror, where it will produce like a 3D textured map for you within a few seconds as you search online databases for various map engines. So you could check that out on AE scripts. I'll also make a reference to that, but something to take a look at. Cool. And everyone hopefully can see my screen there, but I'm here inside of Premiere Pro, and Jason, you just shared with me that line map. And I kind of wanted to go over a few things in order to, let's say, reconstruct the scene for, let's say, for an instance that the only reference that I had was like a JPEG that the final editor gave to me. So one thing is that the map that you used, Jason, was actually larger than the sequence size.
Yes.
So for that, just to sort of match up the framing of this, I used a simple blend mode in Premiere Pro. So I set the above layer here to difference. Now I could have done this with the actual look, but I just did it in particular to sort of match up the pixels here. And then by grabbing on the word motion of the fixed effect here inside of Premiere Pro, I was able to try to start to match up the dimensions of the map through the uniform and vertical scale. And then once I had that matched up roughly, I then fed this into a nest in order to protect an order of operations of effects inside of Premiere Pro. So I'll just call it map scale in this instance. Now, you sent me with 2 things, Jason, and I wanted to mention that they're separate locations of where they're saved. Looks Builder effects are saved under your username in application support for Magic Bullet Looks in a Looks folder. And there's your look, Jason. Then there's a separate location for presets for Universe. And that on a Mac, and I believe this is also true of a PC, that's saved in your Documents folder. So that's under Documents, RG, Red Giant, and then there's a Universe folder with all these RGX effects. So now that this is in a nest, I'm going to head to the Effects tab, or in fact, let me bring up that dashboard, which I have over here. I'm going to switch the order of these 2 effects, but one of those under Motion Graphics was Line. And because I have that installed in the right location, I can apply that as a preset. You guys can all see the line applied. It takes a second to load the full end results. And then just before that was the look. So I'll do a search here in my effects tab for looks, twirl up all my speed looks for Lumetri, and then apply the magic bullet look. And inside effect controls, I'll just twirl up my uniline properties and grab the look to add it before that. And under edit look, because I have that stored in the right location, and a new custom looks folder. Here's that grade that Jason created, which is quite nice and involving quite a few tools inside of Magic Bullet Looks to kind of give that blur and focus look, which is awesome. Cool. So we're able to share those presets, and even better, I would say, Jason, if I was working or doing some finishing inside of DaVinci Resolve, you could also share this workflow with me as long as I had Looks as well as Universe installed, right? So you can travel cross-platform as long as those are saved in the right location.
Yeah,
Now, one
brilliant.
thing, yeah, it's great, and it's like the fact that you no longer have the limitations of XML in some of these workflows when you're using your Red Giant effects. Now, I had a question for you, Jason, and that was, when looking at all of the effects that Universe has to offer, there's over 80, I think, and they continue to add more and more because it's a subscription-based effect. So every single version, there's 2 or 3 effects that gets added. How do you keep your head above water in, understanding all of the effects inside of Universe?
Well, for me, I guess I always start with the dashboard where you are now, and that's a quick way as a visual reference. You can see what each tool's doing. Also, if you keep your eye on the Red Giant website, plus they're quite big on social media, they always release videos of the new features. So whenever a new feature comes out, you see a little promo of it, and then that makes me sort of go and have a play with it. And I guess that's the quickest way of doing it. It's just because, as you say, they keep adding tools, but they keep adding presets within tools. So pretty much every time I open the toolkit, you find something else and think, oh, that's cool. That wasn't there before.
Yeah, and I think they added 2 on the last release and then 3 more on the release before that. So they continue to add effects. And in some of these effects in particular, there's so many presets that are worth at least giving you a starting point. I would say a great example of this is in the motion graphics section. If you take a look at HUD components, when you first look at the thumbnail, it might not look as like there's a lot going on. But once you single click on this, there's like 70 effects available. Everywhere from where you can build your own custom effects, but then all of these other various effects and fingerprint scans and so forth available for you to give you a sense for how that stylistic effects works. Another thing I like about Universe in particular, or try to demystify, is that in certain cases, certain effects that do a combination of things, so give a color look as well as potentially could belong in a blur section, are incredibly easy to use and allow you to add some pretty cool looks right away. So here I have an aerial based shot, and what I'm going to do is single click on the word shrink ray, which mimics a tilt shift effect. So let me just grab here the default look, and I'm going to apply that. We'll apply that preset in the timeline here. And oh, my shrink ray is off. There we go. Let me try that again. Here we go. So here's that shrink ray effect. So it does that tilt shift look, but it also makes your clip very desaturated in order to mimic that shrink ray look or tilt shift look. Sometimes there's some on-screen controls that you can use directly in the effect, like a mask view, where we can see the region that is meant to be in focus, and then 2 other controls that are defining the focused height and the focus width. So here I'll just minimize a bit the focus height, and then also play with the focus width to end up with a really narrow range here with the tilt shift look. And then once I'm done, I can turn off that mask view and see the end result. And take any of these parameters directly within Premiere, within After Effects, and start to keyframe this, such as the focus's position here, where over time, I'll just try to track the subject. And it should be noted that a lot of these Universe effects do have on-screen controls. So simply select them by the name inside of Premiere Pro, and you'll see that this one in particular has two controls, and you can find out what something is when you start to drag it. The effects parameter will update. Cool. So yeah, there's quite a few effects here that I would say that have some deceiving names. Shrink ray, and just in particular, you might be looking for a tilt shift effect, and although it did make sense to me after, it's worth exploring some of these effects and some of these looks. And I think there's a lot to be said about universe effects where one effect is doing multiple things at once and can even do some pretty cool things about scaling your clip and adding some style to it really quickly and efficiently. One of those is kind of creating a carousel type look. So I'll do this on this particular clip. I'm going to single click the carousel look. And I'll start with a very square look. So let me go here for Summer Goth. I'll apply that as a preset to the clip. And we have two things going on, the cropping on the actual clip, some softening of the edges, a feather, and then an overall color and a light leak applied to this at once. Another thing that I like about the universe effects and specifically is the way that they're organized in many cases. You have your overall controls at the top of the effect, followed by various categories of parameters that you can switch to then start creating your own stylistic effects. And in this case, I'm just going to play around with the image offset so that my subjects move a little bit more to the right of the frame. And then I have an overall control of the vignette amount. Now, in trying to mimic this old codec paracel look, we've got a color process, which if you bring down to 0, you get rid of all of the color correction that took place. And then also a light leak overlay on top of these clips. Now, if I'm correct, Jason, you're going to share a few different ways of creating your own light leaks in a little while. Am I correct?
Yes, that's right. I got a few tricks.
Awesome. So yeah, just so great that some of these effects have multiple categories here that are available that you can start to tweak. And in some of the effects that affect the cropping or the scale of an actual clip, you know, they work great when you need to take an essential sequence and maybe share that also with social media. So here we have a look that can basically go cross-border, which I could even add a background image for my 16:9, but then in taking this square look and Premiere Pro's technology to auto reframe a sequence. If you're unfamiliar with this, this is going to set up your project either in a specific social media format, either 9:16 or 1:1. And in that process, I created a square sequence. I'm going to have to offset this video here, just based on the control that I did. But now I have a square media project available for me that I can tweak. And let me just reframe that offset a bit to get it to the center of the frame. So yeah, a lot of these effects can be traveled when you create other sequences within Premiere Pro, and the same workflow exists inside of Final Cut as well on the latest release. Now you were looking at one particular type of glow, or you're looking at chromatic aberration. Am I correct, Jason?
Yeah, well, chromatic displacement I was looking at before.
Correct, displacement, yes. Some of these effects, in particular within the glow category, are the most recent to get updated. And the glow here inside of Universe does share the same method, the inverse fall off glow, as the VFX optical glow. So you're going to get a highly realistic glow using this effect inside of Universe. And I will just apply a highlight effect onto the clip. Here in my timeline. And here we have an example of that. Now at the very top of the effect, you have a threshold amount where you can control which part of the highlights it's affecting. And with that, you then have a super realistic glow that can go brighter than your average 8-bit across your image. So yeah, this was updated. And I believe a few of the other effects within the glow category, specifically for creating more realistic glows, and the addition of Quantum, which was on the latest release. Now I'm going to head over and take a look at one other effect. And I know that you have a counterpart to this within the VFX suite, Jason, but this in particular is a lens flare effect that's available within Universe under the stylize category called No Light Factory Easy. So if you have the full suite of Red Giant plugins, you've got No Light Factory Easy, and then you've got the full version. In the easy version, if I single click, you get about 4 categories worth of presets from the full version of No Light Factory available. And I'm going to head here to the natural light category, and just at the bottom of the list, apply the sunset preset. Now in this effect being cross-platform, let me just turn on the No Light Factory effect. I can of course move the lens flare. And the controls for the easy version are rather simplistic. We have control over the light's location, the color, and I would say one of its most powerful features is your ability to location track your lens flare. So you can use another layer as a obscuration type. So using the dark and white areas of your image, you can reference that image and then hide your lens flare, let's say over areas where you don't want it to show. One way that I could do that in Premiere Pro would be to make a duplicate copy of this clip and throw a threshold effect on it. The other then has to deal with location tracking, where you look at the brightest parts of the image, and without even having to keyframe this lens flare, it will follow the brightest regions of the image that you've identified. And this is pretty much what you have as control for the No Light Factory Easy version, where I think Jason's going to show you guys in a second the huge differences with the full version from the VFX suite that's available. Okay. Now, as a final thing that I wanted to mention, I'm going to actually hop into Universe again. And I wanted to take a look, close down a few of these sequences since my timeline's getting so big. Yes, okay. So I have a clip here in the timeline. Let me get rid of my overlaid effect here. And sometimes in certain workflows, I actually do all of my keyframing in the timeline versus effect controls inside of Premiere Pro. So in this instance, by clicking on the effects badge, I added a time remapping effect to this clip, where we can see a portion of it plays at regular speed. It then ramps down to slow motion, and then cranks itself back up to regular speed at the end of that clip. I'm going to head to the stylize category, and in this case, choose misfire, which is a filmic effect. And we can see some parallels to one of the effects that Jason shared earlier. So I'm going to apply the film damage version here of that preset. And that is that you have some overall controls for the effect at the top. So I can take a collection of damage controls and bring down their value, and then a collection of color controls and also bring down that value, mixing it into the original clip. But if my goal, let me just crank these back up, was to not bring down the entire collection of effects, here's where we twirl down and start to take a look at what the preset has activated and is involved in the operation. So I'd say one of the most heavy effects here, which I want to widen, is the vignette of this filmic look. So I'll head into this collection of effects, and then here is the vignette. And rather than bring down or the overall color amount, I'll come to vignette size under this specific control and widen the vignette to a value of 60, and then just bring down that vignette's intensity to a value of 50 instead of 70, so it's less harsh. So you have control of each of those individual effects in some of these, and the same thing I would say remains true of Holo Matrix, very similar organization where you have some controls at the top and then all of the individual effects at the bottom and parameters for each of those individual effects to stylize and then make your own. So I know you had a couple more things to show, Jason. Let me just hand that back over to you.
Okay.
Here we go.
Great. So one thing Nick was talking about with light leaks, which is quite a popular thing. A lot of editors buy collections of pre-made light leaks. Obviously, within the Universe toolkit, there's Overlight, which creates light leaks for you. But other tricks I use is things like using the Fractal background generator, which again, you can see it's basically, if we go back to generators, it creates a load of different fractal backgrounds. There's one, the soft billows blue, and a couple of these are quite light leak-like. And one of the nice things you could do within the effects controls is here you can see we have a light leak that sort of cycles through colors. Obviously, this is a bit of a default setting, but you could tweak that, change the color, change all kinds of scale, angle controls. But the nice thing here is if you apply this to a clip, as I have done here, each of these tools come with a blend mode inside it. If there's any Avid users here, this is incredibly powerful in Avid because where Premiere has blend modes built in, as any Avid editors know, Avid doesn't have blend modes built in. So having it built into the tool means you can apply it. So we can do a screen, for example, and there you can see straight away I've got a very realistic looking light leak. And the nice thing is, rather than it coming from a collection which every other editor is using, this is completely custom and you can change attributes of it. So even as much as like scrolling it that way and that way is going to make it's unlikely anyone will ever have something identical to that. The other nice thing is I can control the colors and you can pick colors. So obviously he's playing, at that point he was playing for Dallas, which is sort of a deep red color. So we can actually make the light leaks a color that matches his team he's playing for. Then you've almost got like a branded light leak. You can see that's quite cool looking. And then you can play with the blend mode to get different looks. Like go with overlay if you want it to be a bit dark and moody. You can see you get almost a spotlight type effect there. So I guess my thing is always playing with the controls and sort of whenever you play with an effect, have a look through the animation speed if you want it to go faster or slower. I think light leaks tend to look better slower because it's the sort of more subtleness. So that was just a little trick to show you using fractal background for something other than what it was designed, but it's quite a nice way of creating extra looks. I'll jump over to the VFX suite. One of the things Nick was showing is that the VFX Null Light Factory rather. So this is the same Null Light Factory. It's similar in the Universe toolkit, which Nick showed you is the basic version. Within the VFX suite, you have a much more elaborate version. But one tool that Nick covered over is that you can use a luminance value. And here, if I turn that off and show you, so here's a shot of the sun moving around. Rather than try and track the center point, we're using this image, which is basically just, we've pulled a key of that, and you can see it, that's just the brightness of the sun. It's quite nice. We can actually turn enable off so it's invisible. And then what we've done here is so you can see there I've got Light Factory EZ. This is the full Light Factory, which has pretty much the same controls. So what I'm saying is the light source location, let's use video 2, which is this layer here, which is interesting. It works even though that's not enabled. And we're also using an obscuration layer, which is the same thing. It's using the luminance from that layer 2 to obscure. And there you can see my lens flare, which is attached. And you can see it's quite realistic. It tracks like it's a real solar flare. And then moments like that, you can see the flare is actually gone because it's hidden behind a tree. So it's quite a powerful thing. And we can actually pick any lens flare look and it'll keep that obscuration layer. I'll just pick something randomly. I'll go through this in a second to show you in more detail, but let's go for that for the sake of it. And now you'll see we have that lens flare, but it's still going to use the same tracking data and because it's using that location layer and the obscuration data. Likewise, if I come back here, you'll notice that I can move the light source. And in this case, my obscuration layer, I'm using the same image using the alpha. Because this is just a simple element of text, you'll notice as I pull the light down behind the text, it disappears as you would expect because the light source is sort of hidden behind text. So that's the obscuration working. So now the reason you might use null light factory as opposed to the universe one, when I'm editing, I tend to use the universe one because if you want to create a quick light look, it's a very fast way to do it. As you can see, we've got the on-screen controls. Whereas null light factory is incredibly powerful. The controls are pretty much the same, except you have a few things here. You have an edge reaction, which is how it reacts when it gets to the edge. So if I pull that over here, nothing happens at the moment. But what we can do is simulate sort of various edge. If I wind that all the way up to 3, you'll see as we come over, it's almost like it suffers lens distortion and it gets brighter as it goes towards the edge. So obviously that's a bit far, but obviously for the sake of the demonstration, it shows you what it's doing. If we go into a negative value, it'll get dimmer. So now it'll sort of ramp off in, sort of steps off quite harshly, but it happens at the edge of the lens. You can see that it's sort of ramped up a little bit. So you have a few extra controls within the main tool set, but where the true power comes is by pressing this button, and you come to the lens flare designer, and this is where this becomes incredibly powerful. We can pull it around to see what's happening. So it opens this separate interface, which is a lens flare designer. And obviously we can share these lens flares we create. So the nice thing here is there's a even bigger library of custom lens flares or sort of presets. You can see there's hundreds there if we go through them. So I mean, it takes a moment to load up. So you can click on those and then we can move it around to see how it's going to work. You can see the elements in here. Now where this is different to the easy set is whenever you're looking at a lens flare, so this lens flare here, you have a stack here of lens flare editor, and this is showing you every element of this particular lens flare. So you can hide single elements to see what each one's doing. Or if you want to see what this disk is, let's solo it, you can say, okay, there's the disk. And then while it's selected, here's the controls for that actual element. So you can see we can make it brighter, dimmer, and make it bigger if we want. You can see the green halo, we could change that and make it red. And then we can unhide it or unsolo it, and you can see now we've got some red in there. So this allows you to edit every single element within the lens flare. So this bit here, if you're not sure which bit's which, you can always just solo. So you can see there's like a red halo type effect. Solo that. And you can see here, if we scroll down, this lens flare is actually made up of a huge number of elements, and each one is completely editable. You can also get rid of bits if you want to, like if we didn't want the secondaries, we can sort of just find where they are and get rid of all the bits. So you can see there's got rid of all that funny secondary if you don't want that. And then over to the right here, you've then got a library of elements. So you can add extra elements. So if we want a bit more of a traditional sort of secondaries path, we could just add one of those in like that. And there you can see we have that. And then I can edit that and make it bigger. We could change the color, make it yellow. So you can see every step of it is incredibly controllable. And then you can save different things. We can save the preset, which is all of the different things. We can load different individual elements, or you can save. So for example, this one here, I've just made it yellow and quite large. If I particularly like that, I could save that as a preset of that, just that tool. So you can save presets of each element, and you can save a preset of the whole lens flare kit. But one thing that is really cool in here is if I scroll down here, you can import elements. So you can see I've brought in the New York Mets badge. So if I bring that in, that actually becomes part of the lens flare. So you can do things that obviously that's a bit much, but what I would probably do is wind that right back, make it quite sort of subtle. And then you can actually have a logo form. Obviously this is just a straight badge. I wouldn't use a badge, but what you could do is go in Photoshop and sort of create into one of these shapes a logo or brand. So if you were doing a job for Coca-Cola, for example, you could have the Coca-Cola swish in the lens flare. Quite subtle, but it's a nice way of adding an element inside a lens flare. And you'll see when we come out of there, it's now built in, obviously affected by whatever's in our scene.
It's quite powerful. And then
yeah, so I think it's a lot more powerful than the easy tool, but for a lot of jobs, especially as an editor, you're not really want to sit there and play around for too many hours, but it's quite nice if you're doing a more targeted job where the lens flare is quite important. You've got
and
infinite
I think
control.
And one of my favorite uses of null light factory comes in taking some of those elements and actually scaling them up, Jason, and using them as either overlays or backgrounds in some cases. So even just taking one or two of those elements and scaling it up There's another also element I wanted to mention in No Light Factory, the texture element, which could add like dirt or grime or a frozen texture on top of your image, which is pretty cool. And will be, depending on its intensity, will affect the elements of your lens. Where is that?
I could never find it's in here
I think it's
somewhere.
at the top of the list, if I'm correct. I always go by it too at the top. Wait for it. Oh wait, is it in that
It's
last
one of the problems that
section?
there's so many bits.
Yeah, there's so many little bits.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a texture element there. It might be just in the category after this. Nope. In the star filter one? No.
Ah, here we go, lens texture.
Ah, there we go, lens texture. Yeah, so if we go into this, you'll see that in the controls, there's your choices of these various textures. Sometimes I've noticed that depending on the texture that you load in the system you're on, it doesn't always load inside the designer. But once you go inside of Premiere Pro, it should update. Let's see here if the frozen one does. It takes a second in some cases, but there are textures that should be added there to the lens flare, and that was one of the new features there of No Light Factory. And then we also have the automatic animation with them as well for having it blink and so forth without the need to keyframe, which I think is awesome. Now, Amy made a mention too of much earlier where I was talking about HUD components that in Trapcode Forum, you can also create a number of HUD graphics. And yeah, the control of that is awesome inside the form preset area. You can even bring in OBJ or Cinema 4D files. The only limitation is that you're having to work inside of After Effects. With the full version of HUD components, you can design any type of component that you like in any video editor for stylization. Cool. And Jason Kent says, great tips for light leaks.
Cool.
Awesome. So we're just coming close to the top of the hour. Just wanted to double check and see if there were any more questions. Thanks so much, Jay. Really appreciate that. Awesome. Let me bring up a couple screens here just at the end. Jason, you mind sharing the screen? Thanks so much, Jason. So just as I mentioned, we're continuing this next week. And the topic is all about transitions and then also speeding up the editing process. And Jason, I know that you have a ton of tips there and speeding up the editing process based on your own deadlines that you have right now and having to turn around content quickly. So I'm excited to learn a lot from you in that process, which is great. And then just how Universe itself, as with the transitions built in, as well as what you can do with effects for creating some stylistic ones that go beyond what's available in your NLE. And then for the final week, we're focusing all on dynamic titles and some of the tools spread throughout the various Red Giant applications, as well as effects that you can apply that can really add a little bit of production value to your workflow. And just wanted to also mention to everyone here, don't forget the YouTube page where you can check out this recording after the fact at the Maxon Volume Program Training on YouTube. And we're excited to see you guys next week. Hope you guys all learned a lot and have a great rest of your week.
See you next week.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, David. And thanks, Kent. See you guys all next week. Take care.
Bye-bye.